Assalamu alaikum. We're joined today by Zayna Haroon. She is a human rights activist who specializes in the media. She represents Al-Haq in this particular case, but generally works with a lot of different organizations. She was born and raised in the UK, but is currently based out of Ramallah, and she's unfortunately been caught up in the middle of this ethnic cleansing and displacement operation, and if I think we can call it now this absolute genocide. Zaina, we were hoping that we would meet activists like you under better circumstances, but unfortunately, this is how we meet for the first time. How are you? How are you holding up?
Trying our best. As we mentioned today, Gaza is in our thoughts in everything we do. Every time we drink water, we know that they don't have water in Gaza. Today, while the weather is horrifically raining, pouring, we're thinking of our our people in Gaza who have no warm clothes, who have 1.7 million of them have been forcibly displaced. Uh, and are living out of tents with their children in this cold, harsh weather. So our hearts are with them constantly, whilst navigating the unfolding situation in the West Bank, also where we are.
No, it's very unfortunate. We'd like you to know that the international community, when it comes to the global south at least, here in Pakistan, the Arab and Muslim world, I think online as well, you can see that our hearts beat with the Palestinian people and specifically with the people of Gaza in this particular case. As you said, something as mundane as a heavy downpour can mean life or death for the 1.7 million displaced people of Gaza right now. Speaking of the international community, how do you feel this characterization as somebody who grew up in the UK that the 6 billion from the global south are not considered the international community, but the 2 billion who seem to be greenlighting the genocide that is taking place in Gaza right now, they are what is called the international community. The people that are represented by Western liberal democracies, that is the international community. They get to greenlight or put a stop to genocides, and our voices are not heard in this situation. How do you feel as a native Palestinian and as somebody who's lived in both worlds? How do you feel about your homelands, let's say?
Um, for us, the international community, the global south is a huge, significant part of the international community. We have shared struggles, we have shared experiences, and they're incredibly important to us. And some of the global south countries, they themselves have referred the situation of Palestine to the International Criminal Court recently, including South Africa, including Bangladesh. And we really applaud them for doing so. What we will say in terms of, as opposed to the green lighting of genocide or not, I would say it's more those who are supporting it and their double standards when it comes to implementing international law has really become brazen in this situation. It's really become clear and so blatant. They more have an influence in this situation as they are supporting what seems to be a genocidal campaign unfolding on the ground in Gaza. They're supporting it through vetoes at the United Nations when it comes to the US, or the Security Council. They're supporting it through the providing of arms to Israel as they continue massacring Palestinians. And they're supporting it by continuing crucial trade relations and agreements when it comes to the EU and Israel, for example, which really could be used as leverage to hold Israel accountable for the mass violations they've committed against the Palestinian people since before 1948. Even since before 1948, when Palestinians were becoming displaced, when Zionist militias began pushing them out of their homes. So, and then of course, upon the establishment of Israel and the 1948 Nakba, that I'm sure most of your viewers know about, in which Palestinians, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were forcibly displaced. They were forced to leave their homes or fled their homes out of fear so the state of Israel could be established and they could establish a Jewish majority. So this is something that is unprecedented what we've seen in Gaza. To have the head of UNICEF come out and say that Gaza is the most dangerous place for children, to have Antonio Guterres say that Gaza has become a graveyard for children, to have UNICEF say that in 3 weeks more children were killed than in global conflict every single year since 2019. And in every other conflict you would see, even though this is not a conflict, I take back my use of the word, this is a genocidal campaign. In every other situation like this, you would see a call to ceasefire, a call to arms embargoes, a call to urge, not just urging restraint, as these powers have been doing, but actual solid countermeasures to prevent violations from being committed. And where we are now, less than 2 months later, maybe just a matter of 6 weeks later, is that 26 out of 35 hospitals in Gaza are no longer functioning. This is the systematic policy of targeting hospitals, which is absolutely prohibited by international law. We see, according to even the Ministry of Health is no longer, which is a tragedy in itself, they haven't reported the casualties since the 11th of November because we lost communications. But to see, according to the media office, around 14,800 people being killed in Gaza, including 6,000 children, even though those figures are still preliminary. But we know for sure that thousands of children were killed in a matter of weeks. We watched a massacre unfold. And these world leaders who continue to support and greenlight Israel, including the UK, including the US, of course, they've sat down and been complicit in those crimes.
No, it's very tragic that we don't find the level of civility that one would expect when considering the rate at which this is one of the most televised conflicts in human history. I mean, everybody in their homes, on their phones, you have Mohtaz, you have Blistia, you have all these young people, Bisan, they're out there, they're directly, live streaming this on their Instagrams, on Twitter, on Facebook, you name it. The fact that the whole, sort of the international community is getting to see this live, it seems almost that the lobbying groups and the sort of political vested and economic vested interest that the Western world has with Israel seem to trump even the humanity that is demanded by their own people. They seem almost unaccountable to their own electorate, and you see the complete lack of civil and democratic values being exercised because the genocide, not to minimize the genocide in Gaza, it's not just the Gazans who are getting the worst of it. This, like the Iraq war and like the Afghan war, will snowball into people in the Western world also losing their rights. You had things like the Patriot Act coming in after 9/11 and the war on terror that was announced. And you see a common humanity being slaughtered in Gaza for the whole international community. You talked specifically about South Africa and Bangladesh. I think that is very particularly important because South Africa, with its own history of apartheid, with its own history of settler colonialism, as well as Bangladesh, who has a history of both British colonization and their armed struggle against Pakistan, which is my own country, to gain their own freedoms. So I think it's fundamentally, it's very apparent to see that it is only in the global south who have faced these tyrannies in the past that seem to be able to sympathize. Is it true as somebody in the UK, I'm sure you have friends in civil society there and you're communicating with them. Is it true for the average people of the United Kingdom of Europe, the average citizen, or is it just this cold-heartedness that we see from their states, from their government apparatus? What seems to be the case?
I think you mentioned before, this is the global north leaders, apart from a select few. Spain has come out of the woodworks recently and said that they want to recognize Palestine as a state and maybe potentially break with the European Union position, which we strongly commend and we encourage them to do. For the rest of the leaders, they're extremely out of step with their own people. They're extremely out of step, even if you look at the polls. Most people want, even in the US, even amongst Republican voters, most people wanted a ceasefire in Gaza. Most people wanted to see a ceasefire because they're seeing these horrific images of children shaking with fear and trauma, of parents picking up the body parts of their children from under the rubble. They can't even recognize them, writing their child's name on their arms so they'll at least be able to bury them and recognize them if their body is torn apart, as is often the case. Um, the people are seeing these images, and even though there is a campaign, a shameful campaign, often coming from even President Biden himself, who forced the Palestinian Ministry of Health to release every single name, ID number, age of the people who've been slaughtered in Gaza since October 7th, just as proof after the numbers were doubted. I think this is horrific. It's something that it's another form of dehumanization of Palestinians. To talk about those countries that we share a history or have a shared experience of colonization with, because what we are living here under, we're living under a settler colonial regime. And for your viewers who don't know what settler colonialism is, it's the idea of settling a new people into a place to replace the people who are already existing in that space, which is what the Israeli settler project does. It moves in Israeli settlers, it tries them and keeps them under Israeli civil law, and it pushes out Palestinians simultaneously. Even here in the West Bank, around 15 Palestinian communities since October 7th have been fully or partially displaced alone since October 7th. This is something that didn't start on October 7th. This is something these settlers had these communities in mind. They just took the opportunity. These were calculated. They didn't just go to any community. These were calculated threats. And often they were accompanied by the Israeli occupying army. And they would go to these communities, brandishing their weapons, brandishing their guns, and they would say to these communities, if you don't leave within 24 hours, we'll kill you. They took the opportunity under the fog of war to continue a project that was already continuing, but to speed it up, to escalate it while everybody was distracted with the massacres that were happening in Gaza. I think an important point to make, and it's something that I've tried to explain to my Palestinian colleagues here from a British perspective, and this might be interesting to you as well and your audience, is that in the UK, we're not taught about colonialism at all. We're not taught about, in our history classes, we learn about the World War, we learn about the American Civil Rights Movement, but colonialism is not a dirty word. People would say the word colonialism and it would often be met with, it doesn't have that knee-jerk negative reaction as apartheid does, for example, as slavery or as racism. And this is one of the biggest issues that we're facing, because Palestinians, obviously, and many people in the global south who've had these experiences will have a knee-jerk negative reaction due to the horrors of colonialism, due to the horrors and the histories of their countries. But that's not something that people in the UK, honestly, generally speaking, for example, will have that negative reaction too, because we simply weren't taught about it. And if we were taught about it, we were taught about it in such a brief way, in such a mellow way, that the word, even for me myself as a Palestinian, maybe before I went to university, didn't invoke any kind of reaction in me. So this is something that's a struggle to try and get the message across. How do you advocate on behalf or educate people about the horrors of what we're facing under a settler colonial regime, which is also an apartheid regime, when they don't associate that word with horror, as we and many of your audience probably do?
As part of the King's Commonwealth, Pakistan being an ex-colony of the British Empire, I think I understand what you mean when they don't associate the sort of feelings that we might on ground with colonialism as maybe the British do. I think there's a sense of almost historical pride or ancestral pride for like the empire and the idea that somehow they were civilizing the world. So I agree with you that there is this idea of this barbaric global south, the human animals, the children of darkness, whatever analogy you want to take from the current Israeli president or prime minister. That actually is a project that is about 2 to 300 years old. And we've seen a lot of experts and academics say that Israel is the last bulwark for the European colonial project in the global south. Because everywhere else, the colonies either assimilated, like in the case of Australia, where they finished off the local population, and in the case of North America, whatever was left of them, they sort of assimilated in North American, Canadian, or Australian society. In the modern world, you alluded to the fact that this colonial project doesn't let a good crisis go to waste. And like with the 1948 massacres, like with Deir Yassin, you saw that Irgun and Lahi had prepared for these massacres. For they had planned the exact, municipalities, the exact neighborhoods that they wanted to attack, and they were just waiting for a big spark, a big crisis. So similar to that, in the here and now, you see that there was almost an unspoken, in lockstep, there was a consensus on what the Israeli occupation forces, as well as the settler colonialists, had to do. And like you've said, in the last 30 to 40 days, they knew exactly the 15 neighborhoods and settlements that they wanted to displace. Do you think there is a historical lack of accountability for Israel, in particular, from the international community? And why do you think that is? Because they've done this is the exact same playbook that was in 1948. You had massacres like Deir Yassin, that they had figured out manpower, they had figured out access points, they had figured out sniping positions. In the history books, all of this is clear now, and the audience is well aware. They're doing the exact same right now. Why do you think that is? What is the particular ignorance
Uh,
with regards to Israel?
Sorry, could you repeat that last question? The signal was just
Why?
that last line.
That's perfectly fine. Why is there a particular ignorance? Like, I mean, you alluded to it with the fact that maybe colonialism is not something consciously in the political minds of the average individual in the West. But why particularly Israel? I mean, the South Africa eventually got backlash. Why does Israel get to get away with these things always historically?
I think that Israel does get backlash, but like I said, from ordinary people. You see like huge protests in London, something that I've never seen before. Maybe the last time something that was larger than that, but similar numbers, was against the Iraq war in 2003, against invading Iraq. People have mobilized, people have educated themselves. I think for many people, if you're talking about everyday average people, it seems like a really complicated topic that they feel like they shouldn't delve into, as if there's going to be a complex thing that they can't, and they just think, actually, I don't care, both sides, I don't mind, both sides should be, so on and so forth. What we're saying is that it's actually quite a simple situation. We have an occupier, we have an occupied. We have a regime, an apartheid regime being imposed on one side. And we have forcible displacement, continuous forcible displacement and ethnic cleansing since before 1948, which has been imposed on one side. I think that, of course, anyone who studies the history of the Middle East, one of the first lines that they see in a lecture, the Middle East and North Africa, one of the most penetrated regions in the world. This is the many powers want a stake in this region. And this is why maybe the US and Israel, Israel's closest ally, continues to protect it and shield it from accountability, which it has done in the UN, which by vetoing so many resolutions which would hold Israel to account, which it has done by providing billions of dollars of military aid every year to the Israeli government, and which it has done in these latest attacks, these indiscriminate attacks against 2.3 million civilians, half of whom are children. Complete blank check. What did Biden say? There are no red lines. Since when are there no red lines in any kind of military action? Since when does everything go out of the window and you give one of the most powerful military in the region a blank check to completely desecrate the Gaza Strip, to reduce it to rubble, as they promised to do. And this is one of the most troubling things for us, is that one of the most difficult things to prove, if we want to prove or show evidence for genocide, is intent. Now, when you have leaders, military officials, Israeli officials, government officials, clearly and brazenly stating their intent, almost to the surprise of many international experts on genocide, and then appearing to follow through with those statements, it's incredibly disheartening and disappointing that many media outlets have allowed, and many governments have allowed, the continuation of this the parroting of this line, Israel has a right to defend itself. When Israel's stated goal through all of these statements to reduce Gaza to rubble, we are fighting human animals, we will cut off all water, electricity, fuel, and internet, so on and so forth. They have stated a goal which isn't, we will defend ourselves. The goal was, we will collectively punish this 2.3 million people who are trapped in the Gaza Strip. We will make sure that they don't have clean drinking water. We will make sure that their hospitals run out of fuel. We will make sure that they don't have any food and they starve. We'll make sure that they can't move. We will make sure that they have no electricity. They have stated this goal. They said it twice, more than twice. They said it repeatedly. So it's incredibly disheartening that when Israeli officials parrot the same line of Israel has a right to defend itself, and government officials parrot the same line of Israel has a right to defend itself, that nobody has actually challenged them on these statements of intent to commit genocide, and the actual actions where they followed through on those statements.
I think you highlighted something that's very fascinating, that the average individual, especially prior to this particular iteration of the conflict, was working under the assumption that, this sort of like very like sort of cosmopolitan, sort of neutral, I don't have a problem with either side, let the Jewish state exist, let the Palestinians be. I think what's forced it out of them, number one, that confusion was not organic. That confusion, in my estimation, was an actual intended purpose of the Hasbara propaganda machine that Israel has developed to muddy the waters in terms of the actual facts of the case when it comes to the conflict. So, for example, the fact that that new activists do not refer to the Israeli force as the IDF, because that's what they want you to call them. The reason why they choose language that is defensive, that Israel is the only liberal democracy in the Middle East, Israel has never started a single war. The reason why they muddy the water with this kind of propaganda is that they have to present themselves in a situation where, when somebody is given the tagline, Israel has a right to defend itself, it conjures up memories of the Holocaust, it conjures up memories of the Jewish people being beleaguered in Europe. Again, completely removed from their historical experience in the Middle East. In the global south, they've been readily accepted throughout human history. But the conflation between the Jewish issue, the issue of the Jewish population, and Zionist, there is a reason why this exists. There is a reason why this war is being described as this conflict, this genocide is being described as a defense of the Jewish people, because that is the easiest escape for the politicians who hide behind the innocent people in Israel, who hide behind the. In fact, if I had to say, as a neutral observer in the conflict, it is Israel who uses human shields in the settlements. It is Israel who puts forward these settlers, who more likely than not are half-baked conscript soldiers who are not ready to fight the well-trained and well-motivated Hamas fighters. And then they depend on the numbers of casualties to present as some sort of defense for their genocide. So the reason why they flood the propaganda machine of the media with the 40 babies, the beheaded babies, the 1,400 dead, no, it was 1,200, oh, the sexual assault and rapes on women. They can recant all these claims as much as they want later on. In the moment, they get to keep justifying through the news cycle they can keep the population abated to a point where they're allowed to do what they have to do. So, given that you're dealing with a multi-billion-dollar propaganda machine that has its roots in Europe and in the Western world, don't you feel that experience in the West Bank right now, the absolute media silence in the West Bank, and the focus has been completely shifted towards Gaza?
Um, okay, so the West Bank is a perfect example of how where the Israeli line falls down and it fails. They're claiming that Hamas is the root cause of everything, that Hamas is the cause of all problems, that if Hamas was gone, everything will be fine and dandy and great. But of course, in the West Bank, we have the Western-backed Palestinian Authority. So why are our lives so challenging? Why is it so challenging to travel between cities? This morning, I tried to travel from the north to the central West Bank, and it was such a complicated process of check if there's a driver, check if there's a driver willing to drive during these times, check if there's settlers, check the online WhatsApp groups, check the Telegram groups. Are there settlers on the road? Are there soldiers on the road? Can we take this route? Can we take the back route? And all along the way, every single road is lined fully with Israeli flags, fully Israeli settlements everywhere you look. People don't understand the sheer level of land appropriation, illegal land appropriation that the Israelis don't. And they don't understand how much this impacts and how much this makes Palestinian lives a misery, not just for the people that they took the land from and pushed out of those areas. They realize that we live under this apartheid system in which I can no longer actually access that area. I can no longer go to that area without risk to my life. We have to stay concentrated in our cantons, in our bantustans, in our separate cities, and move between those and stay where we are, stay put. This is what the Israeli occupying authorities are trying to do. They're trying to send a message. They're trying to create an environment that's so coercive, that's so difficult to live in, that people pick up and decide, I want a better life elsewhere. Even if it wasn't the physical, forcible displacement that's taking place, in which people are physically removed from their lands, from their homes, from their towns, it's an actual coercive environment which forces a forced displacement. Which also under international law still counts as a forced displacement, just to make people's lives such a misery. There has been some media attention on the West Bank, but there hasn't been enough questioning from our perspective of this Israeli line that they keep parroting, that Hamas is the root cause of it all. As civil society organizations, for years, we have been urging and almost begging the international community to address the root causes. Today, in their new budget, the Israeli government announced a significant amount of money to expand settlements. And an EU representative condemned them online via tweet. When will EU politicians stop tweeting and actually take concrete measures to hold Israel accountable? You have no idea how many accounts we follow, and every single one we urge Israel to not. We urge Israel, we remind Israel that this is against international law. We urge Israel not to build settlement. We urge Israel not to forcibly displace. How long will you urge by tweet instead of actually taking concrete actions? So I do believe there has been media coverage, there has been increased and improved media coverage in the West Bank. It hasn't been fully on Gaza. We've had quite a few requests ourselves to be linked with communities in the West Bank, and quite a few requests ourselves here at Al-Haq to talk about the situation in the West Bank, but nobody is making the link or actually looking at the wider context and really questioning these root causes of everything that's happening, especially if you constantly shut down all non-violent forms of resistance, even as a human rights organization, one of 6 that were criminalized by Israel, including Defense for Children International, Palestine branch, including Ad-Damir, a prisoners' rights organization, including a women's agricultural rights organization. What we're seeing is every single person, every single method, every single possible way you could resist and what would be deemed acceptable to the global north has actually been shut down. We can't do anything. You try and work in a human rights organization, give speeches to the UN, make submissions to the UN, make submissions to the International Criminal Court. These are legal diplomatic pathways to try and push for some kind of accountability. And then you end up getting slapped with a terrorist designation via Israeli military order, because, of course, here in the West Bank, we live under military rule, and we have done since 1967 for decades. We, as a group, Palestinians, once we tried to run, we tried to organize a marathon from Sheikh Jarrah in Jerusalem to Silwan, two communities which are at high risk of forced displacement, and were, especially Sheikh Jarrah was very much in the news a couple of years ago. We got a call from some Israeli intelligence officer saying, if you don't cancel it tomorrow, you'll regret it. This is a run. What more? Much more non-violent can you get in your resistance than bringing families together, wearing T-shirts to run from one neighborhood to another to protest the ethnic cleansing and forced displacement of those neighborhoods? And we were met with the police on that day, the Israeli police, and they did beat us with batons, and they did throw tear gas, and they threw stun grenades. So this is my issue. While the West Bank has been getting some coverage, not enough people are asking why. As we now see a hostage exchange taking place, as Palestinian women and children, not minors, as many Western media organizations have dubbed them, while Israeli kids are children, Palestinian kids are teenagers or minors, they are children. No one is asking why are there so many Palestinian children in Israeli prisons? This is the question that we need to get at. They report it at face value. It's a swap. So people didn't actually know that actually there's thousands of political prisoners in Palestinian political prisoners in Israeli jails, that around 1,000 children are arrested and detained arbitrarily, and that they could face a prison sentence of up to 20 years if they throw a stone at the tank which is coming to demolish their home. This is something that the media and journalists, international journalists, should really work harder at, to actually delve deep into those questions. Why does that exist anyway? So why are children who've never been charged and have sat in Israeli jails for months, why have they not been charged, and why have they been able to have been detained? And then they would find out that Israel is the only country in the world to try children in a military court system. Israel takes children from their homes in the middle of the night. They blindfold them without a parent, without a guardian. They go through an interrogation process. Most of them say that they've been beaten. Some of them report torture, and they're often forced to sign confessions in Hebrew, a language that they do not speak nor they understand. So when you see an article which gives you one line of 150 Palestinian women and minors in exchange for the hostages, it doesn't tell that deep story, the layers of oppression which we've been dealing with for years and years and years, and the international community didn't pay enough attention to give any weight to it.
It's extremely jarring, the kind of images that we're getting out of the prisoner exchanges, the kind of the individual stories. This thing you referred to, teenage male and a teenage female, as opposed to child, infant, children. A lot of people haven't asked, how did this person become a teenager in 6, 7, 8 years? What does that mean in terms of the date of arrest? Like, how old was this kid when he or she was arrested? You reported, you alluded to the fact that physical as well as mental and sexual abuse has been reported from Israeli jails. Children are taken to military courts, and they're harassed into signing confessions to crimes that they have no idea of. It's these kangaroo courts, and as somebody who grew up in Pakistan, we've had 3 major military dictatorships. This sounds exactly like a military style dictatorship, that there is a separate governance and structure for the Palestinian people, and there's a separate government structure and governance structure for the Israeli settlers. And we have very similar situations in Pakistan where people are disappeared, arrested. Don't organize that event. Don't have that seminar. Don't have that book reading or book signing. Don't invite so and such speaker to such and such university. This sort of clamping down on civil society, this sort of clamping down on any sort of legal or democratic activism, as you guys are up to in your declared terrorist organization, and the fact that the only success in terms of actually releasing hostages came from Hamas taking the military action that they did on the 7th of October, what kind of message does this send to the Palestinian people? The few million living in occupied Palestine, in the West Bank, in Gaza, as well as the 6 or 7 million living abroad, or to the Arab and Muslim world at large, the populations that the international community, that the rules-based order that we've been living in for the past 60, 70, 80, 100 years, it's simply not effective in granting the rights and freedoms and securing the liberties and freedoms of the global south, of the Arab people, of the Muslim people, however you want to take it, people of color. It guarantees to them that the only way you're going to get Israel to come to common terms, to come to negotiate with you, is that if you take military action, if you attack their settlements, and if you hold for ransom their citizens as well as their military personnel. I mean, what kind of message does this send to you as a young, educated, the United Kingdom is the scion of liberal Western democracy, right? What does that say to you as somebody who's working on the ground?
It's incredibly frustrating to be working in this field where you're trying your utmost best to the amount of reports the amount of legal analysis our team has pumped out since October 7th and before October 7th. But obviously it was accelerated during October 7th, after October 7th, sorry. Almost you start feeling like, what's the point? There was a meme that was going around at the beginning of October, which said, I feel as useless as international law. There's nothing more heart-wrenching than sitting here, even as I've mentioned it already before, I'm looking at I can't even see out of my window from this fog and rain. And there's nothing that I can do to if I don't have the power to pick up some warm clothes and shelter for people in Gaza right now. I don't have the power to even go, even if we wanted to go and carry them food, to carry them water, to make sure they're fed. How many children, the horrific stories that came out, and we would write and we would report and we would say, we still engage in those systems and we still push and urge the international community who are supporting Israel. Those are the international community who are supporting Israel, and those who have the power, such as the ICC, the International Criminal Court prosecutor, Karim Khan, to actually expedite the investigation into what's happening in Palestine. The situation in Palestine, it was opened years ago. Why was he able to do so quickly with Ukraine? And we support any violations being investigated. It's just incredibly disheartening to see how fast they picked up the situation in Ukraine, as they should. Any abuses, violations carried out against civilians should be investigated at the highest level. But then to watch the equivalent after over 75 years of suffering, to just kind of sit and watch this kind of stagnant investigation, or this slow-paced moves to make investigations. An arrest warrant was issued against Putin very soon after he invaded Ukraine. Now, we have evidence of mass violations of international law, of war crimes that have taken place not just since October 7th, before, because this International Criminal Court investigation, which was opened a couple of years ago, actually spans from 2014. They could be doing so many things. They could be investigating or deterring the Israeli government authorities, the Israeli government officials, from doing more damage, from massacring more Palestinians, if they issued arrest warrants based on violations that have been happening since 2014. But they don't do that. And to kind of illustrate to your listeners the power of a statement, because Israel has been given such a free pass to act with accountability for decades. We have the Bedouin Palestinian community of Khan al-Ahmar on the East Jerusalem periphery, in the East Jerusalem periphery. When the former prosecutor, Fatou Bensouda, before Karim Khan, when the Israelis were planning on forcibly displacing that Bedouin community, all she did was release a statement. She said, I would like to remind you that the forcible displacement of a community under occupation is to paraphrase her, is a war crime. She called it a war crime. And they got scared and they didn't do it. That's a statement. Now, can you imagine how frustrating it must be as EU countries, as the UK signed a new 10-year agreement with Israel? These things could be used as incentives to hold Israel accountable, incentives for Israel to actually abide by international law. Withholding such agreements or refusing to cooperate on such agreements, we have these countries all have leverage. I think the EU gives Israel the most benefits than any other non-EU state within the European Union. Why is that? It could. These are the kind of actions that could be taken to actually push Israel to abide by international law, or even non-governmental bodies like the International Criminal Court. Just a simple statement of warning to say that we're watching and you could be prosecuted. There could be evidence of war crimes here, or anything more substantial could stop this in their tracks. But instead of that, we're just seeing Palestinians continue to be slaughtered en masse. We're seeing a humanitarian pause, just a delay of that slaughter instead of a ceasefire. So it's incredibly frustrating, but we're still engaging with all the processes, and we have to try our best and continue in documenting the violations that are taking place en masse on a daily basis. We have to continue to engage with these bodies because Israel at some point will have to be held accountable for its crimes.
No, it is very disheartening to see. Recently, I was listening to this discussion by Scott Ritter, who is an American Marine and ex-weapons inspector for the UN. He was an anti-Iraq activist, anti-Iraq war activist, and he's currently he was leading the charge in debunking sort of the myths around the Ukraine-Russia war, and now recently in the Israeli genocide against the Gazan people and the displacement in the West Bank. He said something very fascinating. He said that every single Israeli pilot, tank operator, troop on ground, from the lowest rung all the way up to the president and the prime minister, they can potentially be liable in a criminal court of law in the International Criminal Court because they're all violating international law on a regular basis. So Israel, what they do, and you know this better than me, but for the sake of the audience, when they bomb a hospital and then they go on a fact-finding mission to see whether the hospital was housing some sort of Hamas infrastructure or not, which is again an absurd claim from the first place, you cannot legally do that. You cannot, without credible intelligence, you cannot target civilian infrastructure and then go on a fact-finding mission and then go on a search and rescue mission and see, there was tunnels underneath, and we've all seen the absurd videos coming out of the Al-Shifa hospital in particular. Coming back to the earlier point, other than I agree with this that we wish to see more from the international community, and I would say that it is a very strong lobbying groups in Western Europe and in America from the Zionist lobby that force the politicians to not engage with Israel as it would maybe Russia. And it's quite clear that there are a lot of the international bodies like the UN, like the EU, seem to favor the NATO sort of military empire because it's not convenient for them that Russia has invaded the Ukraine, but it's perfectly fine for them that Israel displaced a few million more Palestinians. You see the double standard. But I would really like to know more about this. That what is the view on ground right now? What is the sentiment in the air with the West Bank? Do people is the PLO over? because I see no, you see a lot of talk from Western media talking about, oh, we might have to restructure the Palestinian Authority, and we have to allow for democratic processes to increase, and we have to deal with Hamas. But what seems to me, as somebody completely removed from the conflict physically, that Hamas, and specifically the military wing, the Kataib al-Qassam, their their popularity seems to be at an all-time high internationally. You see, even in Europe and in America, people are seeing the sort of, or the general resistance movement within Palestine. Is this going to go towards a military solution? Because I generally don't believe that political problems should have military solutions, but it seems to be that this is the only language that Israel seems to understand.
I mean, as human rights organizations, like I said, we continue to just say that the international community, nothing will happen. It's not a military solution. It's a solution of political will to address the root causes of everything. The thing that I've been mentioning throughout the whole interview, to hold Israel accountable for the crimes that it's committing, the violations of international law that it's committing. You can't bomb your way. Israel can't bomb and completely decimate Gaza and its health system and then think that this will be the solution to all of their problems. Right now, people can talk about elections as much as they want, but Palestinians tried to have elections a couple of years ago, and the Israelis refused to open an election office in East Jerusalem. The Palestinian Authority, like I said, it's a Western-backed authority, and the only thing, it doesn't matter which body, it doesn't matter if you call it the PLO, the Palestinian Authority, it doesn't matter if you give it a completely different name, as long as we're living under a settler colonial apartheid regime, the Israeli settler colonial apartheid regime, and the root causes of what's going on aren't addressed, then we will continue to be in this situation. We will never have peace in this region. We'll continue to be in this situation, and we'll be having the same conversation next year when everything, I don't want to say blows up again, because every day we wake up in the morning and the first thing I do is check my phone to see who's been killed, to see who's been arrested, to see whose home has been demolished, to see which roads have been closed, to see which villages settlers have attacked. But when it blows up enough to a point in which the international community cares to pay attention, me and you could very well be having the same conversation again next year, and the year after, and the year after, and in 5 years, and in 10 years, and so on and so forth. So unless you actually address the root causes that Palestinians are being denied, the Palestinian people are being denied their very basic rights, their very inalienable rights to self-determination, their right of return for the refugees, their right to live in their own land, the right to actually have control over their own lives, then we will never leave. We will never come out of the situation. And the international community, often ambassadors or representatives for ambassadors come to our office regularly, and they're still talking about the two-state solution. They ask us, so what hope do you have for the two-state solution, or how can we push the two-state solution? And it is almost as if we're living in different worlds. The priority right now is not to put a label on a two-state solution, a one-state solution. Even as an organization, it's not within our mandate to decide on behalf of the Palestinian people. We can give our own personal opinions, but that's not the issue at the moment. The issue right now is to stop the violation of rights, is to stop this, to dismantle this regime, which is the cause of these violations of rights, and then we can discuss about solutions, one state, two states, so on and so forth.
No, it's very well put. Speaking of the regime, don't you think that the absolute intelligence failure on the 7th of October on part of the Likud party and the Netanyahu regime, even with their more sort of unsavory, extreme far-right, Zionist, settler types, even with those, don't you think this regime has lost a lot of favor? Because people will tend to forget that only a few months ago, about 500,000 people were protesting against the Netanyahu government for their overextension in terms of the judicial control that they wanted to exercise. And the criminal charges that the Netanyahu government faces over corruption and other such issues potentially could snowball with this particular incident on the 7th of October. into something larger than that. Do you think that Israeli society is moving farther towards the right in terms of their criticism of the Likud party and the Netanyahu government? Or is it that there will be a sobering down, or do you see a sobering down of the average, the civil society, the citizenry, where they want to simmer down and maybe actually discuss the rolling back of settlements? What do you see on ground and in terms of the political survival of the Likud party?
Honestly, as a Palestinian with a Palestinian ID living under this regime, I don't come into contact with Israelis unless they're pointing a gun at me as I'm driving in the roads. So I couldn't tell you what the opinions are of Israelis, but I would, from our work, from our documentation, I would like to tell you that left-wing government, right-wing government, over the past decades, the settlements have never stopped. It was under the so-called centrist governments led by Benny Gantz that 6 civil society organizations were designated as terrorists and criminalized. So I think that often we can get distracted by whether it's Netanyahu or on the right or on the left. But for us Palestinians, it has never stopped. It doesn't matter if they were left wing. It doesn't matter if they were deemed more appropriate by the international community or more moderate or centrist or bringing together a mixed group of politicians from different backgrounds to form a cabinet. The settlements and the violations have never stopped. And 2022 was the most deadliest year in recent years, since the second Intifada, the deadliest year for Palestinians, and it was also under the centrist government. So I feel like we can often distract ourselves with politicians who are far right, or obviously it's much worse. Now it's the Israeli government is a far right government. We have Smotrich calling for the whole entire erasure of Hawara, a Palestinian town in the north. We have Ben Gvir arming settlers, and settler violence has increased. And he has openly supported forcible displacement of Palestinians, as many other Israeli politicians have. Of course, it's much worse, but it's still more of the same to Palestinians. And we should focus on the fact that this regime for decades has, whether it's under a left-wing government, a right-wing government, or a centrist government, has always oppressed Palestinians and denied their basic rights.
To extend that question, because I agree with you that it doesn't matter whether the government is on the left or the right in Israel, they're all Zionists, and they all stand by the political question of settler colonialism, and they all stand by the increased settlement of European and American Jewry in the occupied territories of Palestine. Then the question for me would extend to whether you see a dismantlement of political Zionism. And what do I mean in the dismantlement of political Zionism? Israel has had one of the biggest exoduses of their settler population after the attacks on 7th October, right? Israel has faced the maximum number of economic, I wouldn't say damage because they get backed up by the Americans very quickly, but let's call it leakages in terms of engaging in this genocide and conflict. You saw in the Lebanese war with Hezbollah that, and we know statements from the Hezbollah leadership that they said that the idea is not to maximize the number of casualties in the IDF. The idea is to create a situation where it is economically not viable for new settlers to come into Palestine, into the occupied Palestinian territories. Do you think Zionism, because I heard a very fascinating take on this from an anti-Zionist Jewish scholar. He said that Israel is the single most unsafe place for Jewish people in the whole world, and this seems to be the case in that Zionism has become almost a perversion unto itself, because it creates the violence against the Jewish people. It creates a sentiment where it is not stable for the Jewish people to survive. And do you, in this Jewish homeland, quote unquote, do you think that even for the far right, simply in terms of matters of I don't know, of reasonability and practical experience, is it going to become harder and harder to be a political Zionist? Do you see them demanding more of a right wing government and more of an extremist Zionist sort of ideology in the government, or do you see them simmering down because, and maybe not ideologically, but simply for practical concerns?
Honestly, like I said in the previous question, that's not something that I could comment on with a lot of background information. Given my situation as a Palestinian, I see the settlements out my window, but I don't come into contact because we're fully segregated. I couldn't tell you how the Israeli street is feeling. I couldn't tell you how Israeli citizens, whether they're going to the right or to the left. I can tell you that I can see Jerusalem from my balcony, but I can't reach it. I can tell you that every day last year, when I had a different job, I commuted to work via the quote unquote apartheid road, Route 4370, which literally was segregated with a wall in the middle for Israelis on one side and Palestinians on the other side. So when it comes to actually assessing where the Israeli street is at, their opinions, what their mindset is, that's something as a Palestinian which is largely inaccessible. It's largely inaccessible to me as someone who has a Westbank ID, as someone who has very limited freedom of movement, and as someone who lives under this apartheid regime where I don't come into contact with these people, even though I can see a settlement everywhere I go. I can see one in the distance. I can't enter those spaces. I can't walk into those spaces. I can't speak to those people. The Israelis that I see are like I said before, they're pointing a gun at me. They're on my route from the north to the middle West Bank today. I saw several Israeli soldiers, as I usually do, pointing a gun at me as I'm trying to get from my grandmother's house to the place that I live to get to work. So that would be more a question to direct at an Israeli political commentator on where the Israeli street, where their heads are at this moment. But what I can tell you is from someone who's living under the apartheid regime, from the perspective of the oppressed, this is all I can see.
It is an indescribable thing that you have attempted to describe, by the way. It is completely alien to me that you would walk the same streets as another whole other population within the same country, and you couldn't meet either. It's completely absurd that you can't go into their settlements and you can't go on the same side of the road. And I think at this point, anyone who is still denying this in Europe and in the Western world is either genuinely uninformed and shouldn't speak about any international affairs and geopolitics and then the local situation in Palestine, or is just disingenuous and is lying. Most probably, statistically speaking, they're a lobbyist. It's a very apt and I think appropriate thing that you said, that it doesn't matter whether they're going to the left or the right. And from your perspective as a Palestinian, it's indiscernible and they're indistinguishable. And for you, the oppression, the increased amount of settlements, the displacement will continue. Um, with the ceasefire, the so-called ceasefire, which is a humanitarian pause or whatever you want to call it, because the Israelis seem to have a lot of trouble admitting that they've received a significant amount of military embarrassment and defeat since the 7th of October. You saw Israel violating even the terms of the truce multiple times. Hamas is upholding their end of the truce. And usually, when Israel goes into a ceasefire or any sort of conflict abation, before that they do a maximum number of damage to civilian infrastructure, which they did this time as well. Do you think that this is it, or do you think that the sort of declared goals are more than just posturing? That the actual conflict will continue for a few more months before the hammer is brought down by the Americans or the Europeans to settle this? Because the Arab League and the Muslim world seems to be unable to, or politically incapable of putting an end to this.
I mean, anything could happen, and the Israelis have stated their goals implicitly in many different ways. Even after the so-called humanitarian pause was put into effect, the Israeli occupying army put out a post telling Palestinians in Gaza who had been forcibly displaced to the south not to try to move north, not to go back north where their homes are. Now, we were incredibly concerned as a human rights organization once we saw leaflets being dropped, telling people, ordering people to move to the south of Wadi Gaza, and then even further south after that, because we've seen this before. We've seen this in the Nakba. We've seen this forcible displacement. And then suddenly we have Israeli officials like Dani Danan writing op-eds in the Wall Street Journal saying that each country should take a portion of Palestinian refugees because Gaza wasn't nice to live in 7th of October, and it's certainly not nice now. Do the humanitarian thing, take some refugees. We've seen this before, we've heard this before. So this has been incredibly concerning to us. So we would say that we could expect anything from the Israelis. We could expect anything from the coming months. We can't predict what's happening. We can't predict how the international community would respond. I never thought I'd see the leader of the Labour Party in the United Kingdom say that Israel has the right to cut off water, food and fuel to 2.3 million civilians, half of whom are children.
No, because
I never thought I'd see that.
The actual Labour leader, I mean, Jeremy Corbyn, I'm sorry to cut you off there, but it's very important for the viewers that the actual Labour leader and the, I think, potential best prime ministerial candidate that they had was, again, by an Israeli lobby, declared an anti-Semite, which is the biggest weapon that they have in their arsenal in terms of demonizing any politician or any sort of public figure that goes against the Zionist project. So I don't find it shocking after the declaration of Jeremy Corbyn as an anti-Semite by the Zionist lobby within the Labour Party. So this uniparty situation that you see in America with the Republicans and the Democrats, and now with the Labour and the Tories in the UK, I don't think I see any move from their states except in terms of losing voter support. That's the only thing that will force them to bring the hammer down on the Israeli expansion regime right now. Because if you look
potentially,
if you look at all the presidential candidates in America, right? And they have a big menagerie this time, right? You have Vivek Ramaswamy, they have Robert F. Kennedy Jr. There have so many people, right? This time, not a single one of them. In fact, in lockstep, they completely, supported the flattening of Gaza. Many of them made genocidal statements, including Nikki Haley and Vivek Ramaswamy. Democrats, Republicans, in lockstep. So that has had in turn a reverse PR effect, I think, on the population as well, where they've been surprised by the speed with which the Israeli lobby has forced these people to take sides with Israel.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's a matter of opinion. Whoever's the best leader of the Labour Party, or whoever's what's going on in the ground at the moment. I'm sure there's many organizations and experts who are monitoring these things and taking polls of public opinion and seeing where everybody stands at the moment. It's not personally within my remit, but the point that I was trying to make was that to see the leader of a left-leaning party, of a left-wing, supposed left-wing party, to declare support for a war crime, because that's what it is. Collective punishment is a war crime. This is the level that it's reached, that people felt so abandoned to this point. Palestinians had no water to drink, as people were starving, as we were getting messages from people, our friends, our colleagues, family members. Some of our colleagues have family members in Gaza saying that they can't find any food in the shops. To hear someone who's an international lawyer, who also at one point specialized in human rights law, I hear, To say something like this is absolutely horrifying, and it speaks to the dehumanization of Palestinians. And of course, now we had many Palestinians attacked in the global north. Yesterday, we heard word of 3 Palestinians who were shot in Vermont, in the US, for wearing the Palestinian scarf kufiyya. Before that, in the US, a child was stabbed 26 times by his landlord, a Palestinian child. These are all incredibly alarming, and we see this as if it's not taken seriously. These threats against Palestinians, not only here but globally, as if a hate crime against a Palestinian it's not seen as likely or not as serious as other groups. So it does add more to that feeling of dehumanization. It does add more to that feeling of we are literally not seen as human by the world when one of our children in the US was stabbed 26 times. How a person could stab a child 26 times to death. So we're dealing with a lot of emotions at the moment. We feel let down by so many people all over the world. We also feel heartened by all those people to keep bringing it back to London, obviously, because that's where I was raised. To see these weekly protests, to see the number of the people who are turning out, to see that people haven't forgotten and they're still going, and we're working with them to keep going. It does show that this image, this narrative that has been the predominant and prevailing narrative for so many years is starting to crack, and people are starting to see through it, hopefully.
No, hopefully people will keep seeing through it, and that this will crumble. I personally believe that this is a watershed moment. I don't think this particular batch of young people is going to let this go. I think the internet has allowed for a sort of connectivity with the Palestinian people and the people of Gaza specifically, that inshallah this time around, I don't think people are going to forget. And I think they're going to hold their local MPs and their electorate accountable. Um, Speaking of your expertise and your background, so you're from the UK and you keep referring back to London and this, seeing the average citizenry get out and protest and in support of the Palestinian people. But your expertise is in the media specifically, and the way that the interplay between humanitarian law and international law and the media. You've had experts like, I wouldn't say expert, you've had media personalities like Piers Morgan, um, almost in a sick sort of way, exploiting the lives of the Palestinian people, uh, whilst he was platforming Palestinian activists. Inadvertently, it seemed in almost a cynical fashion what he was doing was simply keeping everybody busy in the news cycle. And there wasn't any actual he did there wasn't any actual concession to, because of all the interviews that I've seen personally, it looped back to two or three questions. Israel has a right to defend itself. Do you condemn Hamas? What is a proportional response? There's just three talking points that he sort of circled between. As a media expert, you referred to the fact that the Arab people and the Muslim people, and specifically in Palestine, there's been 40, 50 years of dehumanization, where now, even with the stabbing in America and the three kids that were shot coming back from school, uh, how do people like Piers Morgan affect the dehumanization when they do these kinds of shows? Because on the one hand, you have people who stand in support of Palestine saying, at least he platformed us. And you have that. You have the people saying that about the Bassem Youssef interview and about other subsequent discussions that he's had. Do you think platforming alone is going to rehumanize the Arabs or the Palestinians or the Muslims? Do you think something more is needed?
What I find quite troubling about Piers Morgan in his show is that he seems to have made up his mind from his own opinion, and he doesn't seem to be looking to the experts. He has stated clearly that genocidal campaigns.
Sorry, you're gonna have to repeat that. The internet cut out.
Gave him the legal background, the
Sorry,
analysis
you're gonna have to loop
of
back
what's
to.
happening here.
So you're gonna have to loop back to Piers Morgan. That initial point was lost. The internet cut off.
No problem. I said, what I find troubling sometimes about Piers Morgan and his show is that he seems to rely fully on his own opinion, and it often becomes about him more than it does about the viewer itself. Many people, he relies on his own opinion. He decided that what is happening on the ground isn't a genocidal campaign based on his own opinion, even though legal experts such as Noura Erakat even tweeted him, and he quote tweeted her. She tweeted him a whole thread of legal analysis. She's a legal expert on the situation. The media keep parroting this line of Israel has a right to defend itself. Israel quoted Article 51 of the UN Charter to say that it has a right to defend itself, which is absolutely incorrect. They have a right to protect their population, but in international law, they do not have a right to wage war on a population that they occupy. This is incorrect. And this is the problem. The media often focuses on these little lines without actually questioning, without speaking to the experts. This is an incredibly complex situation. So why are we quoting people like Piers Morgan? Why has he become the beacon of everything, or anyone who's got their new hot take on Twitter, instead of focusing on these experts who are providing a thorough analysis of what's going on the ground? And instead, we're taking sound bites, unfortunately, from people like Piers, who's decided that he's an expert and he's been following this for decades. I do have to say something that I, as a Palestinian who was raised outside and moved here a few years ago, knowing everything, reading everything, staying very much on top of the news, there's nothing like living here, let alone being from a family, having family here. So Piers Morgan and many people around the world cannot comprehend what Palestinians are experiencing. There's nothing that I could tell you to comprehend what we're experiencing. I thought I knew. Before I moved here, I thought I knew. And it even took me 6 months for it really to hit me, for the suffocation of what I was feeling to hit me, to the situation, to feel like we have nowhere to go, no space without running into a tank or a soldier, or not being able to do anything, to travel, to move. How we found out that every single thing that we do, from the water that we drink, in over 60% of the Westbank, the Israelis have put down a military order saying that Palestinians can't collect rainwater. It's to that level. It's almost like they control the air that we breathe. So even though I knew all those things and I was advocating on behalf of Palestine before I moved here, there's nothing like living here and it hitting you how much. And even I'm saying that with a privilege. I'm saying that with a huge privilege of knowing that I can leave anytime. And I recognize that fully, because I know that feeling of suffocation, of desperation, of helplessness would be amplified 100-fold more if I didn't have that second British passport to just jump on a plane if things got too much. I'm very, very, very aware of that privilege. Now, Piers Morgan, he keeps saying that he advocated on behalf of Palestinians, that, he's spoken about it for a long time. He's very aware. He's condemned Israel. He's very aware of this conflict. What happened on October 7th is, in his opinion, is the worst thing that's happened ever since this whole thing has begun. Let Piers Morgan watch the documentary of Tantura, the Palestinian village, in which the Israeli documentary, in which Israelis admit to the massacre that they committed. Let him read about Deir Yassin. Let him read about the Nakba as a whole. It makes in no way does this man, who claims to be an expert, who's putting himself in that position, no way can he feel even a fraction of what we feel. And I can't even explain to you that feeling, a fraction of that feeling. So I think it's harmful when he has such a big platform and he uses his influence to state things as fact in a way, or to state his opinion and think that he's found it all out and he's got it all figured out and he's got it all solved. When I don't think he's ever even been here. And even if he came here, he wouldn't have come here as a Palestinian. So yeah, I think it can be harmful in many ways. And I encourage people to really, really look at the experts on this, look to the experts on this, listen to Palestinians on this, because we're telling it from the ground as the situation is on the ground.
No, I think alluding to what I said earlier, it's completely alien for me to even begin to imagine what the experience is living on ground. Like you said, the absolute hell that it is living through occupation and an apartheid state. It, I can understand that it must make you feel a certain type of way when you see this glib, sort of disingenuous attitude by people like Piers Morgan, who are using the international law and the human rights claims, and they're using the rules based order as a cudgel to beat down native Palestinians like yourself. And when you recognize that you have certain amount of privileges as being someone who holds a passport from the United Kingdom, somebody who can hop off train, jump ship at any point in time. First of all, we'd like to commend you for your patience and bravery. Even speaking about something like this must make you, I don't know how uncomfortable or how much pain. And if you even look at the rain and then you feel, about your brethren in Gaza, I can't even imagine, because we over here, like thousands of miles away, feel this way. So, not just Piers Morgan, it's not just the mainstream media. Uh, I think the real savior for this, at least for us, has been the alternative media. Um, there are dangers with alternative media and with the social media, and with false narratives getting out of control. And you saw a little bit of that with the conflict as well. False videos of the actual combat floating around, and you had a sort of propaganda warfare between average citizens and average people and the sort of Israeli intelligence forces online spreading propaganda. Has there been on ground any actual, has there been any allowance for you guys to actually go in on ground and see like any of the sort of claimed narratives by the Israelis, like Al Shifa or the 40 babies or Kibbutz Berry? Because from what we've heard over here is there are very selected few media houses and journalists have been allowed to go in. Has there been any communication with the Palestinian side on behalf of the Israelis that that they can come and verify as third party sources or whatever? Has there been any of that sort of activity?
No, of course not. Of course not. For Palestinians to verify, of course not. It's not really within our mandate to look at the kibbutz berry and so on and so forth. We're an organization which urges everybody to abide by international law, international humanitarian law, every party. And we monitor and document and advocate on behalf of the Palestinian people. This is within our mandate. And of course, we can't even enter there. It's not something that they share with us. It's something they're only, like you said, they're only sharing with media organizations, media agencies. What we have called for is an independent organization. An independent investigation. We've called for the UN Commission of Inquiry to investigate. We've called for the International Criminal Court to investigate repeatedly. And that's why the international community should ask, why is Israel so afraid of an independent investigation? Israel has proven time and time again that it is not capable of investigating itself. I can barely go to the next city, so they're not about to let me in or we barely have any rights. So they're not about to start sharing information or welcome us in to verify anything. And like I said, it's not within our mandate. Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
No, I'm sorry, I framed the question incorrectly. It ended up sounding like I was saying if they were gonna allow you or any Palestinian organizations to come in. No. What I meant was that they seem to be completely averse to any international bodies coming in and investigating the actual claims, which are fueling primarily a lot of the propaganda for the genocide. Propaganda which they seem to be, very wishy-washy in terms of even claiming, because one day they claim one thing and then the other day they completely give up that claim.
Our main concern is any information that is false or could potentially be false, that is used to justify the mass killing of Palestinians in Gaza, or is used to create such outrage to a point where people stop holding Israel to account or green light them to massacre and violate the rights of people in Gaza and the West Bank en masse because they've created such horror and outrage. Like I said before, we have called on the UN Commission of Inquiry. We've called on the International Criminal Court to do their investigations. As Palestinian civil society, this is not new. We've been calling on them for years to investigate the situation in Palestine, to investigate the whole situation. We're not scared. We're not afraid of an independent investigation. So your viewers in the international community should really ask, why is Israel so scared of an international investigation? What are they trying to hide? What are they so worried about? And they've proven before that they can't investigate themselves. During the 2009 aggression on Gaza, the United Nations, they were looking into, I think, 37 counts of war crimes. They were really investigating. On the ground in Gaza, Israel did their own investigation, and they only prosecuted one person for a violation. And that one crime was credit card fraud. So maybe one soldier stole another soldier's credit card, and that's the only thing they found anyone guilty of in that horrific attack on Gaza that killed so many, that caused so much destruction in 2008, 2009. So we've seen evidence that Israel cannot investigate itself. We've seen a lot of false claims come out, including going to Shifa Hospital after they completely destroyed the complex, showing a calendar with Arabic days of the week, claiming that this was Hamas guard shifts, when it literally said الأحد الاثنين الثلاثة الأربعة Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And then they put out this 3D model of a supposed Hamas headquarters under the hospital, this sophisticated big headquarters. They really created this hysteria as if once destroying the hospital, they'll find all the Hamas fighters sheltering under the hospital, and they failed to provide any credible evidence. And now the images that we're seeing out of Al-Shifa, the people who were killed, all a result of that, all because the international community allowed them to do that, which is why so many people they're calling it a war on hospitals. This, tragically.
That's very aptly put. What can we do on ground in Pakistan? What can the average people do to support the Palestinian cause? How can we advocate on behalf of the Palestinian people? How does lobbying look? Because it's beyond just sending humanitarian aid. There has to be something more. There has to be something more. I mean, we're trying to get people involved with BDS. We're trying to get people to educate themselves. We're conducting webinars, seminars, film screenings. What is your unique take, if any, on anything that the Pakistani people specifically, or just general civil society across the world, can do to support the cause of the Palestinian people? And do you recommend any particular organizations and any news sources or channels or things people to follow, and how can they support you and Al-Haq directly?
I would say is keep elevating the voices of Palestinians directly. Keep listening to those experts who are talking on the issue. Every country has a focus on the BDS list because boycotts do move businesses. Boycotts do pressure businesses, whether it's HP using their technology to help with the checkpoints which Palestinians are stopped at, or any other company which is facilitating the Israeli project, the apartheid project, settler colonial project, the aggression. I think a real move of people coming together and actually moving to organize does make a difference, and it does put pressure on those companies, who in turn will, if they move their headquarters, if they stop working with Israel, if they remove their factories from illegal settlements, it really will start to make Israel feel the pressure, because unfortunately the governments around the world are not placing those sanctions on Israel. So the people, this is where the BDS movement was born out of. The governments won't sanction Israel, the people will sanction. through indirect means.
And we hope the people will rise up to the occasion.
I'd say, thank you. I'd say definitely keep elevating Palestinian voices. Like you said, they've broken the Palestinians who are reporting from the ground are giving you detailed updates and context and nuance that often isn't reported in mainstream media, and their voices deserve to be heard unfiltered, unedited.
How can the people follow your work, the work that you're doing with Al-Haq on an individual level? How can they support it, and what should they look out for? Any major events, any major any drives that they can participate in? Anything?
They can follow us on our social media pages, alhaq.org. On our website, we write every single legal analysis, every single submission, every single report for those who want to educate themselves and spread and raise awareness about everything that's happening on the ground from more of a legal perspective. That would be great.
All right. All right. Thank you for your time and your patience. I'd also like to take the time out to let the people know that unfortunately you couldn't come on in terms of video because it's not safe to disclose your identity in the Westbank right now, given the considerations and the behaviors of the IDF. Is there anything you'd like to add, or you have any questions?
No, that would be great. That sounds good. If you could just put my first name, and I know it sounds ridiculous, maybe spell it slightly differently. Zayna is spelled in so many different ways.
Yeah,
then I would usually spell it.
we'll spell it in different
that would be just so it's not as searchable or easily.
All right, no worries.
That would be appreciated.
Thank you for your time, Zayna.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.